Winter in Manhattan always came with a particular ferocity. Grace Shan stood before a jewelry store window on Fifth Avenue, clutching a gift bag containing the Mont Blanc cufflinks she had just selected for her husband, Lucas Liu. Her breath fogged the glass as she exhaled. The woman reflected in the window wore a cream Max Mara coat, her hair loosely pinned, makeup understated. She looked exactly like countless other well-heeled society wives in this city. But no one knew that inside the pocket of that coat was a freshly signed cross-border merger agreement valued at $4.7 billion. "Mrs. Liu, shall I call a car for you?" The store manager hurried out, eager to please. "No, I'll walk." Grace smiled, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes carrying the particular grace of a 35-year-old woman who had weathered life's complexities. 7 years of marriage to Lucas Liu had accustomed her to the title, Mrs. Liu, Lady Liu, Lucas's wife, as though her existence were merely an appendage to a successful man's story. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Lucas, 8 p.m. tonight, Sky Lounge at the Waldorf Astoria. "I have a surprise for you. Dress beautifully." A surprise. Grace's lips curved slightly. Every Valentine's Day for 7 years, Lucas remembered to send flowers, though always the same red roses ordered by his secretary. She glanced at her Patek Philippe, 4 p.m. Enough time for a blowout. Snow flurries swirled along Fifth Avenue. As Grace passed Trump Tower, the glass facade reflected her solitary figure. She suddenly remembered that summer 7 years ago, 3 months after her father's death, when she first encountered Lucas Liu in the Stanford Business School library. He was a scholarship student back then, his shirts washed to a threadbare softness, but his eyes burned with an ambition that was almost painful to witness. "Grace, marry me. I'll make the whole world see you." He had knelt on the Golden Gate Bridge with a bouquet of wildflowers. She never told him she didn't need the world to see her. The Shan Holdings empire spanned 3 continents and 12 countries. As the only daughter of Charles Shan, she had sat in on board meetings at 15 and executed her first billion-dollar acquisition anonymously at 20. But Lucas liked playing the savior, so for 7 years she had played the orphan he saved. Revised, added foreshadowing in their 3rd year of marriage, Lucas came home drunk one night, threw an arm around her shoulder, and slurred, "Grace, my mentor Mr. Chang is right, a man can't live off his wife's connections forever. I need to build something of my own." She had merely smiled and loosened his tie. The name, Mr. Chang, slid past her ear like a drop of water into boiling oil. She remembered her father's last week, how he had gripped her hand and said, "Grace, beware of the Changs. The Shan family's waters run deep, and someone wants to change the oars." But she had believed in love too much back then. She chose to forget. The Waldorf's doorman held open the gilded doors, and Grace inhaled the scent of money, champagne, cigar smoke, expensive perfume, the signature aroma of New York's upper echelons. The Sky Lounge occupied the top floor, a glass-domed space designed to showcase Manhattan's most beautiful night sky. Grace stepped into the elevator and pressed PH, her heart beating a fraction faster than usual. At 35, she found her continued capacity for anticipation mildly ridiculous. The elevator doors opened to music, not the solo violin she'd expected, but the noisy chatter of a cocktail party and the clinking of glasses. Grace frowned slightly, walked down the carpeted corridor, and pushed open the lounge's gilded doors. For a moment, she thought she had walked into the wrong room. The Sky Lounge had been transformed into a business cocktail reception, filled with men in suits and women in evening gowns. On the central stage, a massive LED screen blazed, StarTech Series C funding success celebration. And standing at the microphone, raising a champagne flute in toast, was her husband, Lucas Liu. Beside him, in a crimson mermaid gown, stood a younger woman, brilliant, striking, like a living flame. "Thank you all for being here," Lucas's voice boomed through the speakers. "Today marks not just a milestone for StarTech, but the most important day of my personal life." He gazed tenderly at the woman in red. Serena Sue, before I met you, I thought career was everything. After meeting you, I understand what it means to be whole. The room erupted in applause and wolf whistles. Grace stood at the edge of the crowd, frozen like a statue of ice. Serena Sue. The name was familiar, Silicon Valley's hottest female entrepreneur, founder of StarTech at 28, company valuation breaking $10 billion within 3 years. Grace had a detailed dossier on her desk at the office, because Shin Holdings was StarTech's largest external shareholder. Serena, marry me. Lucas dropped to one knee, pulling out a blue velvet box. A Cartier classic, 3 carats, flawless cut, at least $300,000. Grace's hand instinctively touched the wedding band on her left ring finger. Tiffany, 0.5 carats, purchased by Lucas 7 years ago. She had worn it every day since, never once removing it. Say yes. Say yes. The crowd chanted. Serena covered her mouth, tears rising perfectly on cue. She nodded, and the room exploded in celebration. Champagne popped, confetti showered, everyone applauded and embraced. Lucas pulled Serena into his arms and kissed her, deep, lingering, theatrical. Grace turned and walked away. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound swallowed by the deafening cheers. She made her way to the restroom, closed the door, and turned on the faucet. Ice-cold water ran over her fingers. She raised her head and looked at herself in the mirror. 35. Well-maintained. No crow's feet, skin still taut. But compared to Serena's aggressive, vivid beauty, Grace was like a faded ink painting, subtle, distant, utterly unthreatening. Her phone buzzed. Vivian Chen, her assistant, Grace, board meeting tomorrow 10 a.m. to discuss StarTech Series C follow-on investment. Also, Mr. Liu's $50 million loan application passed preliminary review and requires your final signature. Grace turned off the faucet and took out another phone from her bag, a black Vertu, unbranded, an encrypted line known only to Shin Holdings' inner circle. She dialed. Vivian, it's me. Investigate all financial transactions between Lucas Liu and StarTech, plus his personal account records. And notify legal, prepare an emergency shareholder resolution for StarTech's board. I'm exercising the majority shareholder veto to suspend the Series C round. After hanging up, Grace reapplied her lipstick. Dior 999, a shade of red she almost never wore. The woman in the mirror suddenly looked sharp, lethal, like a blade finally drawn from its sheath. She stepped out of the restroom and collided with a server carrying a pyramid of champagne flutes. The liquid splashed, a few drops staining her coat. I'm so sorry, ma'am. The server turned white. It's all right. Grace's voice was soft. She slipped off the soiled coat, revealing a sharply tailored black dress beneath. Then she straightened her spine, pushed open the lounge doors, and walked back into the noisy circus. Lucas had his arm around Serena's waist, charming a cluster of investors. Mid-sentence, his eyes caught Grace at the edge of the crowd, and his smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Grace raised a champagne flute in his direction, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing at her lips. Lucas frowned, whispered something to Serena, and made his way through the crowd toward Grace. Tonight he wore a bespoke Armani suit, hair immaculately styled, the scent of Terra di Hermes radiating from him, all Grace's selections. What are you doing here? His voice was low, barely containing his irritation. I thought we agreed you'd wait at home tonight. You said you had a surprise. Grace regarded him calmly. Lucas blinked, then produced a perfunctory smile. Oh, I was going to finish up here and then come back to you. It's Valentine's Day, after all. I had my secretary book that French place you like. 9:30, why don't you head over and wait for me? Was proposing to another woman part of the surprise? Grace asked the question with a smile still on her face. Lucas's expression finally changed. He grabbed her arm and pulled her into the fire stairwell. You saw. Grace, it's not what you think. Serena and I, our marriage has been dead for years. Can't you feel that? Dead? Grace repeated the word as if chewing glass. Ironing your shirts every morning, waiting for you to come home for dinner every night, entertaining your investors on weekends, that's dead? Enough. Lucas tore at his tie, veins bulging in his neck. You're always like this. Always reminding me how much you've sacrificed. Grace, I'm sick of your virtue and your patience. Do you know what you are? You're a stagnant pond. Every day with you feels like drowning. His roar echoed in the stairwell. Grace was silent for a long time. So long that Lucas expected tears, hysteria, for her to ask, red-eyed, what did I do wrong? But she didn't. She simply pulled out her phone, opened a file, and held it before him. It was a loan application, applicant Lucas Liu, amount $50 million, purpose, personal investment. In the guarantor column, Grace Shen's signature was already inked. What's this supposed to mean? Lucas's pupils contracted. For 7 years, you've taken out loans in my name totaling $230 million. Grace's voice cut like a scalpel, precise, cold. I signed every single guarantee. Do you know why? Lucas's forehead began to sweat. Because I wanted to see just how greedy you could become. Grace swiped to another document. This is the share transfer agreement you signed this afternoon, selling your 15% stake in StarTech to Sequoia Capital for $700 million. But StarTech's bylaws clearly state that any shareholder transferring equity externally requires a 2/3 board supermajority, and the majority shareholder has right of first refusal. How do you have this? Lucas lunged for the phone. Grace stepped back, easily evading him. Because I am that majority shareholder. Grace enunciated each word. Revised, clarified equity structure. StarTech's true controlling entity is Shen International, which holds 83% voting control through a multi-layered VIE structure. And Shen International is wholly owned by me. Lucas, the shares you've been scheming to sell don't legally belong to you at all. You're just a nominee, a position I gave you 7 years ago to protect your ego. You chose not to look too closely. The fire stairwell fell deathly silent. Lucas looked as though someone had choked him, his face cycling from white to green to purple. His lips trembled, producing broken sounds. You're lying. Shen International's owner is Christine Shen, she's Singaporean. Christine. My mother's English name for me. Grace put away her phone and pulled out the Mont Blanc cufflinks from her bag. Happy Valentine's Day. This is your gift, consider it, a divorce gift. She tossed the blue velvet box into Lucas's chest, turned, and pushed open the fire stairwell door. Light from the lounge flooded in, illuminating her face. Everyone was still laughing, oblivious to the seismic event happening in their corner. Grace walked through the crowd, her stride steady as if she were walking her own coronation. As she passed Serena Sue, she paused. This woman, 7 years her junior, was surrounded by investors, her face radiant with triumph. Her engagement ring glittered under the lights like a smug little star. Ms. Sue. Grace extended her hand. Serena paused, then politely shook it, and you are? An insignificant spectator. Grace smiled. Congratulations. 2 happy occasions in one night. Thank you. Serena beamed. We're still looking for a witness for the wedding. Would you be interested? I'm afraid not. Grace withdrew her hand, a thin layer of frost-like amusement in her eyes. After all, attending my own husband's wedding would be rather awkward. Serena's smile froze. Before she could react, Grace had turned and walked away, her black skirt slicing a clean arc through the air as she disappeared into the elevator. That night, the snow fell heavily over Manhattan. Grace sat in the penthouse at 15 Central Park West, the entire city sprawled beneath her floor-to-ceiling windows like a glittering circuit board. She didn't turn on the lights. Only the glow of her phone screen illuminated her face. For the first time in 7 years, she didn't wait for Lucas to come home. At 3 a.m., Vivian Chen's email arrived. Brief. Grace, investigation complete. Lucas Liu colluded with StarTech's CFO to transfer company assets through related party transactions totaling approximately $87 million. He maintains 3 anonymous accounts in the Cayman Islands. Additionally, he and Serena Sue have already registered their marriage in New York State, 1 week ago. Bigamy. Grace slowly lowered her phone and poured herself a glass of Macallan 25. The amber liquid swirled like liquid gold. She began to laugh, the sound echoing through the empty penthouse, keening and wounded like some injured animal. Then she cried. She remembered her father, Charles Shen, telling her years ago, "Grace, remember, we Shens can fall, but we must get up on our own. We can bleed, but blood must be spent with purpose." Dad, she raised her glass to the void, your daughter failed you. She chose poorly. The whiskey burned like fire going down. At 10 a.m. the next morning, Grace appeared at the conference room on the 36th floor of Rockefeller Center. White tailored suit, hair pinned up, makeup precise and distant. The room was full, StarTech directors, investor representatives, company executives, and Serena Sue. When Serena saw Grace walk in, she shot to her feet. "What are you doing here?" "Ms. Sue, this is Christine Shen of Shen International, our largest shareholder," StarTech CFO hurriedly introduced. Serena's face drained of color. Grace took her seat at the head of the table, opened her folder, and spoke as calmly as if reading a weather forecast. According to StarTech's corporate charter, Article 21, the majority shareholder has the right to convene an emergency board meeting at any time. The sole agenda item today is the removal of current CEO Serena Sue, and the initiation of a comprehensive financial audit. On what grounds? Serena slammed the table, her diamond earrings swinging violently. "You're just a financial investor, you have no operational decision-making authority." "Really?" Grace pulled a document from her folder. "This is the equity pledge agreement you signed 3 days ago, pledging your personal 18% stake in the company to Morgan Stanley in exchange for a loan to purchase an estate on Long Island. But according to Article 37 of the Charter, founder share pledges require unanimous shareholder consent. Ms. Sue, you're in violation." Serena opened her mouth, then turned to look at Lucas, sitting in the corner. Lucas had kept his head down since the meeting began. Now he raised it. Dark circles ringed his eyes, clearly he hadn't slept. "Grace," he said with difficulty, "we need to talk. Privately." "Mr. Liu," Grace didn't even glance at him, "this is a board meeting. Please address me as Ms. Shen or Christine. Additionally, as a nominee shareholder, you're suspected of unauthorized equity transfer and related party transactions. Legal has already filed a complaint with the SEC. I recommend you contact counsel." The conference room erupted in gasps. Lucas's face turned ashen. Over the next 2 hours, Grace dismantled StarTech's leadership with surgical precision. The board voted to remove Serena, appoint a new CEO, freeze all company disbursements, and commission a PwC independent audit. Every resolution passed with overwhelming majority, because Grace's controlling stake, combined with several other institutional investors she'd notified in advance, constituted a commanding supermajority. When the meeting ended, Serena fled the room on her red stilettos like a vanquished peacock. Lucas chased after her, grabbing her arm in the hallway. "Serena, let me explain." "Explain what?" "That your wife is the majority shareholder." "Lucas, you lied to me." Serena shook him off, her voice shrill. You said she was just a useless housewife. You said Christine Shen wouldn't interfere with StarTech. She lied to me too. I had no idea she was Christine. Their argument filtered through the conference room's glass doors. Grace lowered her head, organizing her papers, her lips curved in that signature half-smile. Vivian Chen approached, handing her a document. Grace, here's the divorce agreement legal has reviewed. Grace accepted the 30-page document and flipped to the final page. The signature line for Lucas Liu was still blank, but her own name was already neatly inscribed. Grace Shen. 3 characters, written for 35 years. From today onward, they would belong only to herself. Outside the window, the Manhattan sun shone bright, the snow beginning to melt. Grace stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass, looking out at the city where she was born and raised. Everything was different now. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Ms. Shen, I'm a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. I'd like to interview you regarding Mr. Lucas Liu's bigamy and commercial fraud charges. Grace deleted the message and turned off the phone. Not yet. This play had only just begun. Manhattan's winter was long, but spring always came. When Lucas returned home, it was late at night. The penthouse at 15 Central Park West was brightly lit. He pushed open the door and found Grace sitting on the living room sofa, a stack of papers spread before her. She wore loungewear, makeup free, hair loose, just like every night for the past 7 years. But everything was different now. Let's discuss the divorce agreement. Grace didn't look up. Lucas walked over and sat across from her. He looked utterly wrecked, tie askew, bloodshot eyes, stubble darkening his jaw. Grace, do we really have to go this far? His voice was hoarse. Did you ask yourself that question when you proposed to another woman? Grace finally looked up. No anger, no accusation, just a placid calm that chilled Lucas to the bone. Lucas pressed his hands to his forehead. I know nothing I say matters anymore. But Grace, these 7 years, it wasn't all fake. At least in the beginning. In the beginning, you needed my guarantee signatures. You needed my connections. You needed me to play the supportive wife so your investors would feel secure. Grace's tone was as flat as a weather report. Lucas, the most honest thing between us was your exploitation and my self-deception. She pushed the divorce agreement toward him. Sign it. Split marital assets 50-50, though almost all of these so-called marital assets came from my family trust or your fraudulent gains. I can't be bothered to fight over the details. Lucas picked up the agreement, flipping through it page by page. The more he read, the whiter his face became. The terms were airtight: property division, retained civil rights to pursue his related party transactions, legal liability for StarTech's irregularities, and one particular clause. Upon dissolution of marriage, Party B, Lucas Liu, waives all rights to claim against Shen International and its affiliated entities in any form whatsoever. You had this ready all along. Lucas set down the agreement, a bitter smile crossing his face. How long? From the moment I discovered your first anonymous Cayman account. Grace said. 3 years ago. Lucas shuddered. 3 years. That was when he'd first begun collaborating with Serena, first believed his business acumen was sufficient to escape reliance on Grace. She'd been planning this ever since. You know what? Grace rose, walked to the window, and turned her back to him. I gave you chances. Countless times. Every night you came home late saying you had business meetings, I told myself you were just tired. Every time suspicious transfers appeared in your accounts, I told myself it was normal business. Until you started preparing to transfer StarTech shares, the one thing you should never have touched. My father's legacy. Your father's legacy. Lucas's head snapped up. StarTech was founded by Serena Sue. The first round of StarTech's funding came from Shin International's angel investment, with the condition that founder shares would be held by Shin International and nominee until the company went public. Grace turned, something predatory flickering in her eyes. Serena signed that agreement herself. She probably didn't tell you that, did she? Just like she didn't tell you her MBA tuition was a Shin International scholarship, and her first office was Shin-provided free space. Her so-called self-made success was built entirely on Shin foundations. Lucas collapsed into the sofa like an emptied sack. You two made a perfect pair. Grace smiled softly. One wanted my money, the other wanted my husband. Neither of you realized, neither was ever yours to take. Lucas closed his eyes. Finally, he picked up the pen and signed his name on the divorce agreement. The scratch of pen on paper sounded like a funeral march for a dead relationship. I have one more question. Lucas's voice was barely a whisper. If you were this rich, this powerful, why did you pretend to be an ordinary housewife for 7 years? Grace picked up the signed agreement, checked it over, and slowly replied, because of my mother. She sat back down and poured herself a cup of tea. The mingled sense of steam and scented candle gave the living room the feel of a confessional. My mother was an MBA from Harvard, the youngest partner at McKinsey when she married my father. But once she became Mrs. Shin, she gave up everything. Everyone envied her for marrying well, only I knew she wasn't happy at all. She was like a nightingale trapped in a golden cage, the most expensive perch in the world, but she never sang again. Grace's voice grew distant, as if narrating a story from long ago. I was 16 when she slit her wrists in the bathroom. Her suicide note said just one thing, I've lost myself. Lucas's breathing stopped. So I thought, if I gave up being Charles Shin's daughter and only tried to be an ordinary wife, could I hold on to love? Could I avoid my mother's fate? Grace stared at the tea leaves floating in her cup. But I was wrong. Love isn't preserved by endurance. When I hid Grace Shin and only became Mrs. Liu, I'd already lost myself. The living room was silent for a long time. Outside, Manhattan blazed with light. The Empire State Building's spire glowed red against the night sky. This sleepless city had witnessed so many rises and falls, love and betrayal. Lucas stood and walked toward the door. He looked 10 years older. Grace, he said, hand on the doorknob, not turning back. If there's a next life, I hope I'm worthy of you. The door closed softly. Grace sat alone in the empty living room for a long time. Then her phone rang, Vivian Chen. Grace, PwC's preliminary audit is in. StarTech's books are worse than we thought. Beyond Lucas's asset transfers, there's also tax fraud involving the government. Serena tried to delete server data but our team stopped her. The FBI's Commercial Crimes Division is now involved. Understood, Grace said. Have the legal team in my office at 8 a.m. tomorrow. After hanging up, she walked to her walk-in closet. 100 square meters of clothes, bags, shoes, all in Lucas's preferred style, gentle, understated, non-threatening. Grace pulled open a hidden cabinet at the back. Inside lay another world, black, white, crimson, every piece sharply tailored, like battle armor. She chose a black suit, then a pair of 12-centimeter Jimmy Choos. Then she went to the bathroom, picked up a pair of scissors, and without hesitation, cut off her waist-length hair. Strands fell like black snow onto the white tiles. When the last lock fell away, a stranger stared back from the mirror, short hair, long neck exposed, jawline defined, eyes sharp as a newly honed blade. Grace looked at herself and finally smiled. A real smile. Welcome back, Grace Shin. Cutting her hair was just the beginning. Over the next week, Manhattan's business world experienced a minor earthquake. First, StarTech announced the suspension of its Series C round, CEO Serena Su resigning for personal reasons. Then the Wall Street Journal broke the news. StarTech was under investigation for financial fraud and tax evasion, the FBI officially involved. Then came the bigger bomb. Lucas Liu was indicted by the Southern District of New York Federal Court on charges of commercial fraud and bigamy. The photographers captured his arrest, hands cuffed behind his back, face a mask of terror and confusion. When the news broke, Grace was attending a charity luncheon at the Four Seasons. The society wives at her table were all discussing it. Apparently that Lucas Liu's wife is a pitiful creature, followed him for 7 years, and he cheated and broke the law. I've met Mrs. Liu. Quiet woman, doesn't say much. How tragic. They're divorced already, I heard. What'll she do now? No job, no kids. Grace quietly cut her steak, knife and fork making no sound. Beside her sat a silver-haired woman, Anna Wintour, editor of Vogue, and an old friend of Charles Shun's. She leaned over and murmured, "Had enough fun yet?" "Just getting started." Grace smiled. Anna shook her head, though her eyes held approval. "Your father would be proud." After the luncheon, Grace didn't join the other wives for afternoon tea. She climbed into the black Maybach waiting at the hotel entrance. Vivian Chen was already inside. "Grace, Lucas's lawyers have contacted us. They're offering to settle out of court, waive all property claims in exchange for dropping criminal charges." Vivian handed over a legal letter. Grace glanced at it, then set it aside. "Bigamy is a criminal case, I can't withdraw charges even if I wanted to. And commercial fraud, he embezzled from the company. The victims are all shareholders. I don't have the authority to forgive him on everyone's behalf." "Understood." Vivian nodded. "Also, Serena Sue wants to meet you." "No." Grace gazed out at the passing cityscape. "Tell her to communicate through counsel. And that Long Island estate she bought, the bank is starting foreclosure proceedings. If she's interested, I might consider buying it, convert it into Shin International's training center." Vivian tapped notes into her iPad, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The Maybach pulled up at Rockefeller Center. Grace stepped out and walked into the building. The security guard held the door for her. The receptionist respectfully inclined her head. "Good afternoon, Ms. Shen." This was Manhattan. Last week she was the invisible Mrs. Liu, this week she was Ms. Shen, worthy of reverence. The transformation of status sometimes took a lifetime, sometimes, just an instant. On the 36th floor, the legal team was already waiting. Leading them was Shin International's general counsel, James Carter, white-haired, sharp-eyed, a Jewish lawyer who had practiced in New York for 40 years without losing a single commercial case. "Ms. Shen, the situation is even more favorable than predicted," James opened without preamble. "Lucas Liu used insider information for personal trading during his tenure as a StarTech director. That's a felony. Combined with tax fraud and document forgery, his sentence won't be less than 7 years. I'm not interested in his sentence." Grace took her seat, scanning the faces in the room. "I want a clean break. From today forward, Lucas Liu must have no legal or commercial connection to Shin International whatsoever. Every project he touched must be thoroughly reviewed. Every contract he signed, reassessed. I want to ensure not a single nail of his remains in the Shin Empire." "Understood." The lawyers busily took notes. The meeting lasted 4 hours. When Grace emerged, night had fallen. Vivian Chen approached, her expression somewhat unusual. "Grace, your father's former lawyer, Michael Zhou, is here. He says he has important documents that require your personal receipt." Grace paused mid-step. Michael Zhou was Charles Shin's most trusted attorney, and a man who had watched Grace grow up. After her father's death, he had retired and moved to Florida. She hadn't seen him in years. "Where is he?" "Your office." Grace walked quickly down the hall to her corner office, pushed open the door, and found an elderly man in his 70s sitting on the sofa. He wore an old-fashioned bespoke suit, his hair pure white, but his back was ramrod straight. "Uncle Michael." Grace took the old man's hands. "Grace, you've grown." Michael Jo looked at her with complex emotions in his eyes. "You look so much like your mother. Especially with the short hair now." Grace made tea for him with her own hands. Michael took a sealed envelope from his briefcase and slid it toward her. "This is your father's codicil from 7 years ago, stipulated to be opened upon the dissolution of your marriage. I've been waiting for this day." Grace accepted the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside the seal was a handwritten letter. Charles Shan's bold calligraphy leapt off the page. "My dearest Grace. When you read this, you will have walked away from a wrong choice. Do not blame yourself. After your mother died, you sought warmth to replace maternal love, and that's why you chose a young man with nothing but love to offer. Your father saw this but could not stop you. Some lessons must be learned by falling. But no daughter of Charles Shan falls and stays down. Enclosed is a safe deposit key and code at Credit Suisse. What I left you there is not money, it is capital that will allow you to stand again, no matter what. Remember, the women of the Shan family were never meant to be anyone's appendage. Your grandmother preserved the family fortune through wartime. Your mother taught me, through her sacrifice, what independence truly means. And you, my daughter, you will be stronger than all of us. Because you know loss. And you have tasted endurance. From now on, nothing and no one in this world can make you bow your head. Go reclaim everything that is yours. Your father. Charles Shan." The letter slipped from Grace's fingers. She covered her face, her shoulders heaving. 7 years of suppressed grievance, rage, and pain burst forth all at once. She cried like a lost child, finally finding her way home in the words her father had left behind. Michael Jo rose, gently patted her shoulder, and quietly left the office. Vivian stood guard outside, turning away all subordinates who came with work matters. Some time later, the office door reopened. Grace emerged, eyes red, but her gaze was clear as a rain-washed sky. "Get the car. I'm going to the airport," she said. "Where?" Vivian blinked. "Zurich." Zurich's winter was even colder than New York's. When Grace emerged from the Credit Suisse vault, she carried a titanium briefcase. She stood in the heavy snow for a long time, looking up at the leaden sky, snowflakes melting on her lashes into icy droplets. Inside the briefcase was a shareholding chart and a key. The chart revealed that Shan International was far more complex than she'd realized. Through 7 layers of cross-shareholding, it ultimately controlled an offshore trust called Shan Capital. And this trust was the true foundation of the Shan family. Its asset scale was more than 3 times Shan International's book value. The key, meanwhile, opened a safety deposit box in another Zurich bank's underground vault. Grace drove there. Through 7 security checkpoints, the elevator descended dozens of meters, and finally she stood before a massive titanium door. The key turned, the airtight door slid open silently. Inside the vault was only one thing, a letter and a seal. The letter, again in her father's handwriting. "Grace, this is the true secret of the Shan family. Shan Capital was founded in 1949, established overseas by your great-grandfather amid the chaos of war. After 3 generations, it has become one of the world's largest shadow conglomerates. The Shan International you know is not the full picture, that's just the visible tip of the iceberg. What you truly own is this empire. This seal is the scepter of Shan Capital, held only by each generation's head. Now, it is yours. Power is not for display. It is for changing the rules. Be who you want to be. Do what you want to do." Grace picked up the seal. Shoshan stone, warm as jade, engraved with the character, Shan, in an ancient, powerful hand. She pressed the seal to her palm, feeling the warmth and weight of the stone. In that moment, she held something heavier than money. A century of her family's will pass down through generations. When she emerged from the vault, her phone reconnected to the signal, flooding with messages. The most prominent was from Vivian Chen. Lucas's trial is set for the day after tomorrow. Serena Sue held a press conference claiming she was a victim, deceived by Lucas. She also released evidence of his asset transfers, trying to secure whistleblower immunity from prosecutors. Grace read the message, deleted it, and dialed another number. Uncle Michael, I need you to do something for me. Convene all managing partners of Jean Capital. 3 days from now, general meeting in New York. There was a long pause on the other end. Grace, do you understand what this means? It means that from today, I'm no longer Mrs. Liu, no longer Christine Shen, no longer just the heir to Shen International. Grace gazed out at the falling snow. I am the new head of the Shen family. And I want everyone to know, the women of the Shen family were never meant to be supporting characters. She hung up and walked toward the Rolls-Royce waiting at the bank entrance. The chauffeur opened the door. She slid into the back seat, watching Zurich's snowscape recede through the window. Her phone rang again, an unknown number. Ms. Shen, this is Serena Sue. A slightly anxious voice came through. I know you hate me, but we have a common enemy now, Lucas Liu. We can work together. Grace hung up. Work together. Serena still didn't understand. She was never a player in this game. She was just a pawn on Lucas's chessboard. And Lucas himself was merely on Grace's board. A true hunter never reveals themselves as prey. New York, Manhattan Federal Court. On the day Lucas's trial began, reporters crowded the courthouse entrance. When the transport van pulled up at the side entrance, cameras flashed in a blinding white storm. Lucas wore an orange prison jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him, escorted by 2 marshals. He had lost weight, cheekbones prominent, eyes sunken, days of stubble darkening his jaw. But just before entering the courtroom, he turned back to scan the gallery. Grace sat in the front row, black suit, short hair tucked behind her ears, expression as calm as a deep still lake. Lucas's lips moved as if to speak, but the marshals pushed him toward the defendant's box. The trial moved quickly. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of bigamy, commercial fraud, and tax crimes. Each document, each recording, each witness testimony hammered Lucas's guilt deeper into place. The defense's attempt at a not guilty plea seemed pathetic against the mountain of evidence. The only dramatic moment came when Serena Sue testified as a whistleblower. She wore a plain gray suit, no makeup, looking haggard and remorseful. Asked about her relationship with Lucas, she wept. I had no idea he was married. He told me he was single, that Grace Shen was just a business partner. I'm a victim too. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Lucas gripped the railing, knuckles white. During cross-examination, Grace's attorney James Carter rose. He approached Serena, eyes behind his glasses gleaming like a predator's. Ms. Sue, you claim you didn't know Mr. Liu was married. Then is this your handwriting? James held up a document, StarTech's original shareholder agreement from its founding. On the final page, in the witness signature line, Serena Sue's name was clearly inscribed, and the document she witnessed included Grace Shen's joint ownership of Lucas's shares as his spouse. Serena's face went white. This is. Answer yes or no. Yes. And this document? James raised another file. This is a confidentiality agreement you signed 3 years ago, which explicitly mentions Grace Shen, spouse of Lucas Liu, as a related party. How do you explain that? Serena's lips trembled, unable to form words. Your Honor, I have no further questions. James smiled and turned away. East, streamlined trial scene. Lucas shot to his feet, pointing at Serena. You liar. You knew all along. You're the one who encouraged me. Order. Order. The judge pounded his gavel. Two marshals forced Lucas back into his seat. Serena fled the witness stand, face buried in her hands. Through the chaos, Grace sat motionless, expression unchanging. Only those closest to her might have noticed the almost invisible upward curl at the corner of her mouth. The jury convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced Lucas Liu to 9 years for bigamy, commercial fraud, and tax fraud, plus $12 million in fines and forfeiture of all illegal gains. As marshals led him away, Lucas suddenly turned and shouted toward the gallery, "Grace! Grace! I'm sorry. I regret." Grace rose and walked out, ignoring the eyes of the room. She didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining. Vivian Chen approached. "Grace, reporters are at the main entrance. There's a car waiting at the side door." "No side door." Grace put on her sunglasses. "Front door." She pushed open the main courthouse doors, and immediately, a tidal wave of flashes engulfed her. Reporters swarmed like sharks scenting blood, microphones thrust forward. "Ms. Shen, are you satisfied with the verdict? Will you press charges against Serena Su? There are rumors that you're the de facto controller of Shen International, is it true?" Grace stopped, facing the cameras. The flashes cast flickering light across her face, but she didn't blink. "3 things," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. 1. The law has delivered a just verdict, and I respect that. 2. As of today, I will formally assume the role of chairman and CEO of both Shen International and Shen Capital. And 3. She paused. Behind the sunglasses, a glint of something like amusement. 3. I want to thank my ex-husband, Lucas Liu. He gave me a 7-year education in a hard truth. The most foolish fantasy a woman can have is believing that sacrificing herself will earn her appreciation. So from today, Shen International will establish a dedicated fund to help women who have lost themselves in marriage to stand again. It's called the Grace Fund." Then she walked to the waiting car, flanked by security, ignoring the questions that followed. The moment the car door closed, Grace removed her sunglasses and leaned back with a long exhale. Vivian handed her a bottle of water. "Grace, the Shen Capital Managing Partners meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Here's the agenda." Grace accepted the folder and flipped through it. Suddenly, she stopped. "What is it?" "Revised, added payoff for foreshadowing." Grace pointed at a name on the list, Eugene Chong. Wasn't he Lucas's mentor at Stanford? Vivian checked and nodded, yes. Eugene Chong has been a managing partner at Shen Capital's North American division for 15 years. Grace's fingertips lingered on the name for a moment. 7 years ago, on the rainy night after her father's funeral, Michael Zhou had privately handed her a slip of paper, 1 name and a string of numbers. The name was Eugene Chong. The number was a Cayman account. She had tucked it into her diary, still numb with grief and dizzy with new love, and never opened it again. "So it was you," Grace said softly, her voice betraying nothing. "Father told me to beware of the Changs. It took me 7 years to understand." Vivian's expression shifted. "You mean 7 years?" Grace said softly, her gaze turning unfathomable. "Lucas was embedded with me for 7 years. He didn't do it alone. Someone was behind him, someone who knew the Shen family, knew Shen Capital intimately. Someone who could open doors, move money, and stay invisible." The car wove through Manhattan's traffic, the city's endless glitter streaming past. Grace put her sunglasses back on, hiding the cold light in her eyes. The game had only just entered the second half. The Shen Capital General Meeting was held in the penthouse suite of the St. Regis Hotel. Managing partners from 12 global divisions assembled, each a titan of finance who could move markets with a phone call. But when Grace pushed open the door, every single one rose. She wore a bespoke black suit, short hair immaculate, the Shoshan stone seal clutched in her hand. At 35, she stood among men whose average age was 60, a drawn blade in a room full of old sheaths. "Please sit." Grace took the head seat, her eyes slowly sweeping every face in the room. "I've called this meeting for 3 announcements." Absolute silence. "First, per the codicil in my father Charles Shen's will, effective immediately, I am assuming the role of Chairman and Global Chief Investment Officer of Shen Capital. Please circulate this transition document." Vivian distributed documents. As pages turned, some faces registered surprise, others contemplation, and others, like Eugene Chong, extreme discomfort. "Second," Grace continued, "I'm ordering an independent audit of all Shen Capital investments over the past decade. The auditors will be personally appointed by me and are not subject to objection." The words landed like a bomb. The room buzzed with murmurs. Ms. Shen, a white-haired partner, spoke up. "Shen Capital has been performing well. A comprehensive audit would cause unnecessary market speculation. Shen Capital has 7 anonymous subsidiary accounts in the Cayman Islands, 3 of which are linked to the StarTech asset transfer case." Grace interrupted, her voice calm. "Is that performing well?" Dead silence. The white-haired partner went pale and slowly sat back down. Grace's gaze settled on Eugene Chong. Lucas's mentor was staring at his documents, fingers trembling slightly. Third, Grace rose and walked to the window, turning her back to the room. "My father often said the purpose of Shen Capital was not to make money, but to preserve the Shen family's century-old foundation. But in recent years, some have turned this foundation into a tool for personal gain." She turned, eyes like knives. "Mr. Eugene Chong, please explain why Lucas Liu, that outstanding student you personally recommended to StarTech, transferred over $50 million through your accounts over 3 years." Eugene Chang's head snapped up, sweat beading on his forehead. "Ms. Shen, this is slander. I have served Shen Capital faithfully for 35 years. 35 years, Grace nodded. "So you know every vulnerability of Shen Capital perfectly, including how to use cross-shareholding complexity to conceal fund flows." She pulled a stack of papers from her folder and tossed them onto the table. Bank statements, email correspondence, call logs, spread across the surface. "This is material provided by the FBI's Commercial Crimes Division. Mr. Chong, shall I explain the triangulation between you, Lucas Liu, and Serena Su, in front of everyone?" Eugene's face cycled white to green to purple. His lips trembled violently. Finally, he collapsed into his chair like a punctured balloon. "Why?" His voice was aged and broken. "Your father gave me everything, why would I?" "Because of greed." Grace walked to him, looking down. "You weren't satisfied with your partner distributions. You wanted more. Lucas Liu's appearance gave you an opportunity, a poor boy who married the Shen heiress, with both motive and access. A perfect arrangement." Eugene closed his eyes, seeming to age a decade in an instant. "Security." Grace pressed the intercom. 2 uniformed guards entered and escorted Eugene out. As he passed Grace, the old man paused and whispered so only she could hear, "Grace, you're harder than your father." "My father wasn't hard enough. That's why you're still here today." Grace replied, word by word. The door closed. Grace walked back to her seat. "Audit effective immediately. Those who come forward voluntarily and return funds will be treated leniently. Those who attempt to hide, who harbor delusions of evasion, Eugene Chong is your example." No one objected. When the meeting ended, evening had fallen. Grace stepped out of the St. Regis, the winter sunset painting Manhattan's skyline in shades of crimson and gold. Vivian met her, handing over a phone. "Grace, the first round of applicants for the Grace Fund has been shortlisted. Also, Anna Wintour has invited you to speak at next week's Vogue Women's Power Forum, opening keynote." Grace took the phone and scrolled through the faces of ordinary, exhausted women, single mothers whose husbands had emptied their savings, middle-aged housewives who had sacrificed careers for family only to be discarded, full-time mothers suffering domestic abuse but too afraid to leave. Every face held a shattered self. "Tell Anna I accept," Grace said. And increased the fund's first disbursement to $50 million. Not just financial aid, legal services, job training, counseling. "I want these women to truly stand again." Vivian was making notes, then looked up. "Grace, you've changed so much." "Have I?" Grace looked across the street, where an advertisement was being torn down from an old department store. The old image came away, revealing bare concrete behind. "You used to only care about business decisions and shareholder returns. Because I used to think that being strong enough meant I wouldn't get hurt." Grace walked toward the car. "Now I understand, true strength isn't about not getting hurt yourself. It's about making sure other women never have to suffer the wounds you did." The door closed, the car merged into Manhattan's flow. And tomorrow, the sun would rise again. The Vogue Women's Power Forum was held at Lincoln Center. When Grace stepped onto the stage, 3,000 audience members fell silent. Spotlight on her, black gown, short hair, the Shoshan seal pinned to her chest. "My name is Grace Shen," she said, her voice carrying through the hall. 7 years ago, I was Mrs. Liu. 3 years ago, I was Christine Shen. Today, I have finally become Grace Shen again." On the enormous screen appeared a photograph from her wedding day, long hair, soft smile, like a vine clinging to a tree. "This was me 7 years ago. I believed a woman's happiness was finding a good man and supporting his success. I hid my credentials, abandoned my career, even transferred most of my equity anonymously. I thought sacrifice would earn appreciation, but I was wrong." The image shifted to the Waldorf Astoria, Lucas proposing to Serena. The audience gasped. "This was the night I discovered the truth. My husband, proposing to another woman. And that woman happened to be the CEO of my own portfolio company. What a coincidence." Grace's tone carried a hint of self-deprecating humor, scattered laughter rose. "People ask me, with so much wealth, so much power, why endure 7 years? The answer is simple: fear. I was afraid that if I wasn't gentle enough, devoted enough, enduring enough, I would end up like my mother, losing everything in marriage. My mother, Harvard MBA, McKinsey partner, became a full-time housewife after marrying my father, and at 42, ended her own life." Complete silence. "She taught me, with her life, if a woman ties her entire worth to a man, no matter how outstanding, how successful, it's dangerous. Because the moment you give up yourself, you've placed yourself in a position to be abandoned at any time." Grace paused, her eyes moving across the hall. "So today, I stand here not as a successful businesswoman, but as a woman who once lost herself and found herself again. I want to tell every woman in this room, whether you're a CEO or a housewife, single or married, 20 or 50, never give up the right to be yourself for anyone. Real love never requires you to sacrifice yourself in exchange. People who truly love you will love you whole, not the trimmed version." Thunderous applause. During Q&A, a young woman stood, her voice shy. "Miss Shen, I've been with my college boyfriend for 5 years. He proposed recently but wants me to be a full-time housewife. I've always dreamed of being a lawyer. What should I do?" Grace looked at her, saw herself at 20. "Don't give it up," she said firmly. "If your dream is to be a lawyer, be a lawyer. If he truly loves you, he'll be proud of you. And if he leaves you for it, trust me, you've dodged a bullet." More applause, the girl sitting down with red eyes. After the forum, Grace met Anna Winter in the green room. "Well done," Anna embraced her. "Your mother would be proud." "Thank you, Anna." Grace's smile was unusually soft. "What's next?" "Still much to do." Grace looked out the window. First round of Grace Fund grants have launched, Gen Capital's audit is in progress, and also. Her phone buzzed. Vivian, Serena Sue has filed suit against Lucas Liu in Southern District Court for emotional distress. Also, her lawyer sent us a letter accusing you of abusing majority shareholder power at the StarTech board meeting. Grace read the message, smiled, and passed the phone to Anna. Anna read it and laughed. Does Serena not realize StarTech's legal department now reports to you? She may think causing a big enough public scene will win her sympathy. Grace pocketed the phone. But this is New York. In the world of capital, tears are the cheapest currency. She gathered her bag and said goodbye. Thank you for the invitation, Anna. Lunch soon. Walking out of Lincoln Center, Manhattan's night was just coming alive. Grace stood on the steps, looking at the sleepless city, and took a deep breath. The air smelled of early spring. Vivian's car was waiting at the curb. Grace slid in and said, "Ignore Serena's suit, let legal handle it. And schedule a meeting for me with the Southern District Federal Prosecutor. I have new evidence on Eugene Chang's case to submit." New evidence? Vivian looked at her in the rearview mirror. Eugene didn't just help Lucas transfer assets. Grace opened her encrypted phone files. He also used Gen Capital's channels to launder money for a foreign government. My father was investigating this before he died. Half the material in that Zurich vault is about this case. Vivian drew a sharp breath. Why haven't you mentioned this before? Because the timing wasn't right. Grace gazed at the flowing city lights. Eugene has backers, someone powerful enough to keep him in the Shen family for 35 years. I need to draw the snake out of its hole. The car passed through Midtown Manhattan and stopped before an unremarkable gray building, Shen International's new property, and the headquarters of the Grace Fund. Grace took the elevator to the top floor. The space was still under renovation, only temporary furniture occupied the empty floor. But the first thing she'd had installed was already in place, floor-to-ceiling windows, before them a massive glass display board covered with photos and stories of the fund's first recipients. A single mother learning to code after escaping domestic violence. A middle-aged housewife starting her own bakery after divorce. A 60-year-old woman finally leaving her controlling husband. Under each photo, handwritten, "There today, my yesterday." Grace stood before the display, studying each face. Then she picked up a marker and wrote below in English. "This is just the beginning." Outside, Manhattan glittered in the darkness, like a galaxy reflected on the earth. Her phone rang. Michael Zhou. "Grace, I've traced it. Eugene Chang's connections do lead to Washington. And your father's last investigation before he died showed, his death may not have been an accident." Grace gripped the phone, knuckles white. Evidence? Grace took the elevator to the top floor. The space was still under renovation, only temporary furniture occupied the empty floor. But the first thing she'd had installed was already in place, floor-to-ceiling windows, before them a massive glass display board covered with photos and stories of the fund's first recipients. A single mother learning to code after escaping domestic violence. A middle-aged housewife starting her own bakery after divorce. A 60-year-old woman finally leaving her controlling husband. Under each photo, handwritten, "There today, my yesterday." Grace stood before the display, studying each face. Then she picked up a marker and wrote below in English. "This is just the beginning." Outside, Manhattan glittered in the darkness, like a galaxy reflected on the earth. Her phone rang. Michael Zhou. "Grace, I've traced it. Eugene Chang's connections do lead to Washington. And your father's last investigation before he died showed, his death may not have been an accident." Grace gripped the phone, knuckles white. Evidence? Incomplete. But the direction is clear. The driver in your father's accident 7 years ago, 6 months before the crash, his account received a transfer from a company linked to Eugene. In the window glass, Grace's reflection stared back. Her eyes were red, but no tears. "Keep digging," her voice was terrifyingly steady. "I want the full truth." After hanging up, Grace stood in the dark for a long time. Then she opened her phone to an old photograph, Charles Sheen holding 10-year-old Grace, both beaming before the Statue of Liberty. "Dad," she whispered to the photo, "I took 7 years to see the truth about my marriage. And even longer to realize, your death may not have been an accident. But you taught me that a Sheen can fall, and must get up on her own." She pressed the photo to her chest, looking out. In the Manhattan night, the Empire State Building's spire glowed red, a lighthouse that never went dark. Spring arrived. Manhattan's spring always came quietly, first a drizzle washing away the remnant snow, then the first green shoots on Central Park's trees. Grace stood at her office window, watching the city transition from gray to pale green, like an old photograph slowly recoloring. 3 months had passed. StarTech's independent audit was complete. Most of Lucas and Serena's embezzled funds had been recovered. Eugene Chang had been formally indicted by federal prosecutors. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he provided a list that shocked everyone: 2 senators and 1 Commerce Department official in Washington. The investigation expanded to include Charles Sheen's traffic accident 7 years earlier. The FBI had reopened the case. And Grace's Grace Fund had quietly helped over 1,000 women. Today was the fund's quarterly internal review. Grace sat at the head of the long table, listening to departmental reports. Legal aid: we've filed 43 marriage fraud cases, 100% win rate. Job training: first cohort of 300 graduates, 91% placement rate. Counseling: developed a cognitive behavioral therapy protocol for marriage trauma, clinical trial results significant, pending publication in the American Journal of Psychology. Grace nodded at each, then turned to finance, fund status. Expenditures to date, $28 million. But last month we received our first external donation, $5 million, from an anonymous beneficiary. Note attached: to the woman I was 7 years ago. Grace's gaze flickered. She knew that donor, the single mother who'd learned coding and landed a Google offer. After the meeting, Grace remained alone. Vivian knocked and entered with a tablet. "Grace, today's New York Times, your feature interview." Grace took the tablet. On the screen, a photo of her standing before the Grace Fund's photo wall, the line, "There today, my yesterday," behind her. The headline, "From Mrs. Liu to Ms. Sheen, a woman's disappearance and rebirth." She skimmed it. The reporter's writing was solid, no excessive sentiment, just a factual account of her journey, from anonymous housewife to billionaire empire builder, from betrayed wife to founder of a foundation helping women rebuild. "Well written," Grace said, setting the tablet down. "But one request: future interviews, focus on the Grace Fund, not on me." "Understood." Vivian nodded, hesitating. "Something else?" The New York State Bar Association, Lucas has filed an appeal from prison for sentence reduction. His lawyers claim he was a secondary actor, used by Serena and Eugene, not the mastermind. Grace was silent for a few seconds, then smiled faintly. "Let him appeal. And tell him I've bought StarTech's remaining shares. I'm now 100% controlling. Every cent he transferred will be recovered, including his parents' Long Island estate." Vivian's eyes widened. That house was his parents' retirement home. "It was purchased with a mortgage guaranteed in my name." Grace's gaze was sharp. "I'm not a saint. I have mercy for the innocent, but only justice for the perpetrators. Notify legal, civil recovery proceedings to begin simultaneously." Vivian nodded and left. Alone in her office, Grace walked to the window, surveying Manhattan's skyline. Sunlight gilded the glass facades. Her phone rang. "Michael Zhou." "Grace, the federal prosecutor's office just called. Eugene Chang has provided new evidence for sentencing reduction, A recording of your father's phone call 1 week before his accident. Grace gripped the phone. What did it say? Your father said to Eugene, I have all your connections on the Hill. The FBI will receive the complete chain of evidence Monday. 3 days later, your father's car accident. The sunlight outside suddenly seemed too bright. Grace closed her eyes. She saw herself 7 years ago, her father in his study, speaking in his steady voice. Grace, the most dangerous things in this world are never the enemies in plain sight, but the friends in the shadows. Remember, when you threaten interests great enough, those hiding in darkness will stop at nothing. She hadn't understood then. Now she did. Uncle Michael, forward that evidence to the FBI. And contact an investigative reporter at the Washington Post. It's time the public knew about my father's case. She hung up, went to the bathroom in her suite, and splashed cold water on her face. The woman in the mirror had clear, steady eyes, no hesitation. She reapplied her lipstick and walked back to her desk. Just as she sat down, the intercom buzzed. Ms. Shen, Serena Sue is in the lobby. No appointment. She insists on seeing you. Grace considered a moment, then said, send her up. 10 minutes later, Serena appeared in the office doorway. Grace barely recognized her. 3 months gone, the once brilliant entrepreneurial queen was a different woman, bare-faced, wrinkled trench coat, hair in a hasty knot, fine lines clearly visible without makeup. She clutched a worn canvas bag, standing in the luxurious office like a misplaced piece of dust. Ms. Shen. Ms. Shen. Serena's voice was hoarse. Thank you for seeing me. Sit. Grace gestured to the chair across. Serena sat, gripping her bag strap until her knuckles whitened. After a long silence, she spoke, my lawyer says you won't drop the charges. Why would I? I wasn't involved in the money laundering. Those accounts were Lucas and Eugene, I genuinely didn't know. Ms. Sue. Grace interrupted calmly. You may not have known about the laundering. But you knew Lucas was married. You not only knew, you helped him hide it, even manipulated StarTech's share structure to your advantage. That's not speculation, that's written in black and white in documents you signed. Serena's face flushed red, then white. I was in love with him. Love. Grace repeated the word without mockery, only a bone-deep weariness. Miss Sue, it took me 7 years to understand, real love doesn't make you break the law. It doesn't make you hurt innocent people. It doesn't make you unable to face yourself in the mirror at 3 a.m. That wasn't love. That was greed wearing love's mask. Serena's shoulders shook violently, tears falling on her hands. I lost everything, she sobbed. My company, my reputation, my fiancé, even though the engagement was a joke. My parents moved to rural Michigan because of the neighbors' stares. I live in a basement in Brooklyn now, working 3 jobs a day. Grace Shen, I've paid my price. What more do you want? Grace watched her cry, offering no tissues. After a long moment, she spoke, you know what? I hated you. Very much. Serena looked up through tears. But then I realized, you weren't the root of the problem. You were just the mirror reflecting it. Without you, there would have been someone else. The real problem wasn't between you and me, it was between me and myself. Grace's voice grew soft, nearly a soliloquy. I hid myself for 7 years to preserve a false marriage. That wasn't Lucas's fault, it was mine. He didn't force me to give up myself. I did it willingly. She rose and walked to the window. So I forgave myself. And I forgive you. Serena looked up, stunned. What do you mean? Grace turned, holding a document. This is an agreement to drop all personal charges against you. Sign it, and you're free. Serena took the document with trembling hands, unable to believe her eyes. Why? Her voice was barely audible. Because you're only 29. Grace looked at her. Because your mistakes haven't ruined your life yet. Because I believe every woman deserves a second chance. Just as I gave myself one. Serena covered her face and sobbed openly. Grace rang for Vivian. Take Ms. Sue to the Grace Fund. Help her find job training. Then she turned back to Serena. This isn't charity. This is what you owe society. Use your talents to do something truly meaningful, and this time, no shortcuts. Serena nodded frantically, still weeping. As Vivian led her away, Grace walked to the photo wall. She picked up a marker and wrote beneath, there today, my yesterday. Forgiveness isn't for others, it's to truly set yourself free. She set down the marker and took a deep breath. Manhattan's setting sun painted the office in warm gold. Grace stood at the window, looking at the city of her birth, feeling a lightness she'd never known before. She knew there were harder battles ahead. Her father's case reached too deep, opponents hiding at the highest levels of power. But she was no longer the woman hiding behind that Mrs. Liu mask. She was Grace Shen. Charles Shen's daughter, head of the Shen family, helmsman of Shen Capital, founder of the Grace Fund. No title mattered more than those two words, Grace Shen. Her phone buzzed again, Anna Winter. Grace, I need a co-chair for next month's Met Gala. Are you interested? Grace smiled, my honor, Anna. Wonderful. Theme is, rebirth. I can't think of anyone more fitting. After hanging up, Grace picked up a photo frame from her desk. It was her 10th birthday, her father holding her mother beside them, all three beaming as if they had the whole world. Mom, she whispered to the photo, I didn't end up trapped in a golden cage like you. I flew out. Can you see me from heaven? The photo's mother smiled back, forever silent. Outside, Manhattan's night lights flickered on. The Empire State Building glowed soft purple, the color of International Women's Day. Grace shut down her computer, grabbed her bag, and prepared to leave. Passing the photo wall, she took one last look at the faces, women once shattered, now whole. Every one of them radiant. She turned off the lights, closed the door, and walked to the elevator. The click of her heels echoed down the hall, a firm, resolute declaration. I am Grace Shen. This is my city. My empire. My life. And I'm just getting started. In the penthouse at 15 Central Park West, Grace stood before the mirror in her walk-in closet. Tonight was the Met Gala. She wore a black velvet gown, gold-embroidered vines on the shoulders, a pattern she'd had recreated from her mother's old cheongsam. Her hair was shorter now than 7 years ago, a few silver strands at the temples, but she never dyed it. 42 years old. 7 years older than when she discovered Lucas's betrayal. But these 7 years had been richer than all her previous 35 combined. She emerged from the closet to find the nanny helping a little girl build blocks in the living room. Seeing Grace, the child toddled over, Mommy. Mommy pretty. Grace lifted her 4-year-old daughter, Natalie Shen. The name she'd chosen, Natalie, meaning born at Christmas, but she chose it for the peace it evoked. Natalie was the daughter of a domestic abuse victim. Her birth mother had died when she was 6 months old. Natalie, Mommy's going to an event. I'll tell you a story when I get home. What about? A story about courage. Grace kissed her daughter's forehead. About how a woman found herself again. The nanny took Natalie, and Grace left the apartment. In the elevator, her phone rang, Michael Zhou. Grace, the Supreme Court decision is in. Howard Keller, former Secretary of Commerce, mastermind behind your father's accident, sentence upheld. Life without parole. Grace closed her eyes as the elevator descended, her heart contracting. Justice for my father, she said softly, finally arrived. Exiting the building, Vivian was already waiting. Now 37, Vivian was no longer the nervous assistant of 7 years ago. She was Chief Operating Officer of Jean Capital's North American Division, sharp and decisive. Grace, the Met Gala red carpet awaits. Also, Time magazine wants a cover interview. Grace Shun, the woman redefining the American dream. Reply that I don't accept that definition, Grace said, sliding into the car. I'm not a spokesperson for the American dream. I'm a spokesperson for every woman who refuses to bow. Offer the interview to that single mother CEO from the Grace Fund. Her story is more valuable than mine. Vivian smiled and tapped her iPad. 7 years, and her boss had changed in many ways, but some things remained constant, that bone-deep pride, and that tender solidarity with other women. The car moved through Manhattan's night to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. On the red carpet, camera flashes made a river of light, stars, supermodels, celebrities, each striking a perfect pose. But when the black Maybach stopped and Grace stepped out, every lens swiveled toward her. She walked the carpet with unhurried grace, gaze steady. The Shoshan seal on her chest glowed warm in the flashes, now not only the Shun family scepter, but the emblem of the Grace Fund. Ms. Shun. This way. Ms. Shun, what are your thoughts on the Keller verdict? Christine. Over here. Grace stopped on the museum steps and turned to face the press. She remembered, 7 years ago, standing on the federal courthouse steps, surrounded like this. Then she had just emerged from the ruins of her marriage, armor-clad, eyes sharp as blades. Now, the armor remained, but the blade had softened into something more flexible, yet somehow stronger. Just one thing, her voice carried through countless microphones. Justice may be delayed, but it's never absent. For my father, for every woman the Grace Fund has helped, for every soul waiting for light in darkness, that holds true. She turned and walked into the museum. Beneath the crystal chandeliers, Anna Wintour welcomed her with an embrace. You'll be the brightest star tonight, Anna whispered. Perhaps, Grace smiled, her gaze moving past Anna's shoulder to a gallery beyond. But tonight I'm not here to shine. I'm here to say goodbye. Anna raised an eyebrow, following her gaze. In the center of the exhibition hall hung a massive oil painting. This year's Met Gala installation, titled Rebirth. A phoenix rose from ashes, its feathers composed of countless small photographs, faces of women the Grace Fund had assisted. Grace walked to the painting and stood before it. Every face, she remembered. Every name, she could speak. This was her 7 years. Their 7 years. Vivian approached. Grace, time for your speech. Grace nodded and walked to the stage. Spotlight on her, 3,000 guests' eyes converging. She looked down. There was the First Lady, Oscar-winning actresses, Silicon Valley queens, and also the single mother who'd learned coding and landed a Google job, the middle-aged housewife who'd opened her own bakery, the 60-year-old woman who'd left her abusive husband. She'd invited them all. 7 years ago, Grace began, the hall falling silent. In another part of this city, I discovered my husband was proposing to another woman. That night, I stood at my window at 15 Central Park West and felt my world collapse. But I learned later, it wasn't the world that had collapsed. It was the cage I'd built for myself. A cage called Good Wife. A cage called Sacrifice is Love. A cage called Women Should Be Gentle. 7 years have passed. I've rebuilt my world, not repaired the old one, but built a new one. In this new world, I'm no longer anyone's wife. I don't hide my education or my wealth. I don't make myself smaller to please others. I've become whole. True. Free. Grace Shun. Thunderous applause. Grace paused, her eyes falling on an empty seat in the front row. A bouquet of white roses rested there, her mother's favorite flower. But tonight, Grace's voice caught slightly, I'm not the main character. Tonight's heroes are them. She gestured to the phoenix painting. Every woman who rebuilt herself from ruins. Every woman who refused to be defined, tamed, diminished. Every woman, including those not here tonight, still fighting her own battle. So tonight, I announce this. Revised, removed exact figure for donation. Grace took a document from Vivian and raised it high, a Jean Capital share transfer deed. I'm transferring 50% of my personal shares in Jean International and Jean Capital to the Grace Fund, for global women's empowerment. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed wildly. Everyone whispered. It was the largest single charitable donation in history, a figure that eclipsed every previous record by an order of magnitude. Grace lowered the document, smiling. The seal my father left me bears the character, Shun. But I want to tell him today, this character isn't meant to be kept. It's meant to be given. The Shun family's century-old foundation should become the cornerstone for countless more women to stand on. Because I've finally understood, true power isn't control. It's liberation. True wealth isn't hoarding. It's sharing. True strength isn't defeating all men, but making all women strong. She stepped down from the podium to a standing ovation. Anna Wintour met her, eyes red. You mad woman. Do you know what you've done? Yes. Grace smiled. I've fulfilled my father's wish. The purpose he left me power for wasn't to make me another capitalist, it was to give me the chance, one day, to change the rules of the game. She walked to the phoenix painting, where Vivian had appeared with Natalie. The 4-year-old pointed at the feathers. Mommy, who's this? Grace lifted her daughter, looking at her mother's portrait on the phoenix's wing, painted from an old photograph. The woman in the painting was in her 30s, long hair, a smile both gentle and melancholy. This is Grandma, she said softly. The one who taught Mommy how to fly. Natalie tilted her head. Where is Grandma? In heaven. Grace kissed her daughter's forehead. She's watching us. Outside, the Empire State Building's spire glowed gold, a light Grace had requested specially for this night. Golden light, for every soul reborn from ashes. Grace held her daughter before the phoenix. Cameras flashed endlessly behind her, but she didn't turn. She was looking at a tiny photo in the corner of the painting. Herself, years ago, in a wedding gown, long hair, leaning on Lucas Liu's shoulder. That was the dead Mrs. Liu. And she was Grace Shun, alive. In full view of everyone, she took out her phone and scrolled to a message saved 7 years ago, Lucas's final text on their divorce day. If there's a next life, I hope I'm worthy of you. Grace deleted it. Then she looked at her daughter, at her mother in the painting, at the 3,000 guests behind her, at this city, at this world, and whispered. No need for a next life. In this one, I've already surpassed everything. Natalie reached for the seal on her mother's chest. The Shoshan stone gleamed warm in the light, the character, Shun, polished by time. A century's scepter. A rebirth's witness. And in a 4-year-old's chubby hand, just a pretty stone that caught the light. Grace smiled. This smile was real. Not the forced composure from the night of betrayal 7 years ago. Not the armor-like sharpness facing the press after divorce. Not the calculated calm of the boardroom. Just a woman who, after reaching her darkest point, stood once more in the sun. Outside, a golden firework rose into the sky above Manhattan, blooming into a phoenix spreading its wings. The Empire State Building's custom light show, 10 minutes of illumination, all for the Grace Fund. Every second, a goodbye to the past. Every second, a declaration to the future. Grace carried her daughter out of the museum, standing at the top of the steps. Countless lenses aimed at her, but she didn't look at any of them. She looked up at the phoenix made of light and said softly. Fly. A Boeing 787 touched down at JFK International. First off the plane was a middle-aged woman in a camel coat. Her graying hair was cut short, her face bore the marks of time, but her eyes were as bright as they'd been 15 years ago. She held the hand of a 9-year-old girl who clutched a book to her chest, cover stamped with a golden phoenix and the title, The Woman in the House of Cards, a biography of Grace Shun. At the airport exit, reporters had been waiting for hours. Today was the 12th anniversary of the Grace Fund and the opening of the Global Women's Empowerment Summit in New York. As the summit's founder and keynote speaker, Grace's return drew worldwide attention. But she didn't head for the VIP channel. She walked through the arrival hall, hand in hand with her daughter, like any ordinary traveler. People streamed past. TV screens flickered with news. Suddenly, Natalie stopped, pointing at a screen. "Mommy. That's you." Grace looked up. On screen, a documentary trailer played, about 12 years of women the Grace Fund had helped, from African villagers learning farming techniques, to girls reading in secret Middle Eastern schools, from garment workers organizing unions in Bangladesh, to female entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley landing their first venture capital. The narration was Grace's own voice. True power isn't lording over others, it's empowering more people. True freedom isn't enjoying it alone, it's sharing it with all. Natalie tugged her sleeve. "Mommy, you said the courage story you told me about, that was you, wasn't it?" Grace crouched to meet her daughter's eyes. "It was me," she smiled. "But it wasn't just me. It was every woman like your birth mother, women who may never be in books or on TV, but who are each a story of courage." Natalie nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "Did all the bad people get punished?" Grace didn't answer immediately. She remembered Lucas, died of a heart attack in prison 8 years ago. He'd left a note requesting his ashes be scattered in San Francisco Bay, where they'd first met. She hadn't attended the funeral, but sent white chrysanthemums through Vivian. The card had 4 words, "May you rest." She remembered Serena. 6 years ago, after graduating from the Grace Fund's training program, she'd gone to Southeast Asia for volunteer work. Last year, a photo arrived, Serena standing in a Laotian rice field, surrounded by local women, smiling like a different person. On the back, "Thank you for teaching me what real love is." She remembered Eugene Chong, life in prison, spent his final years in the federal penitentiary library. Dying, he'd sent word, "Tell your father, what I owed, I've repaid." She remembered Howard Keller, the former Secretary of Commerce, who'd hanged himself in his cell with a bedsheet. Before dying, he'd scratched a line on the wall, "Money can't buy everything." They all faced consequences. But Grace had long stopped caring. "What matters isn't punishment, Natalie." She took her daughter's hand and continued toward the exit. "It's choice." "Choice." "Yes." Grace pushed through the glass doors of the arrival hall. New York's early spring wind hit them, carrying the scent of grass and soil from Central Park. Choosing love over hate. Choosing forgiveness over revenge. Choosing to stand instead of fall. Those choices, they have more power than any punishment. Natalie was silent for a moment, thinking. Then she asked, "Can we get ice cream?" "Mommy, you said, every 10,000 women helped, you reward yourself with 1 scoop." Grace laughed. The sound dissolved into the spring breeze, mingling with all the city's noise. "Yes. But this time, 2 scoops. Because the Grace Fund just reached 200,000 women helped. That number's still growing. So we deserve a whole bucket." Mother and daughter walked hand in hand toward the parking lot. Behind them, Manhattan's sleepless skyline rose, the Empire State Building's light flickering at its peak, the city that had witnessed so many rises and falls, loves and betrayals, losses and returns. And she was just one of a million stories. A woman who'd lost herself and found herself again. A woman who'd built her own castle in a house of cards. They called her many things, Grace Shun, Christine, Ms. Shun, founder of the Grace Fund, the most generous philanthropist in history. But her favorite name was what Natalie called her. "Mommy, hurry. The ice cream shop will close." "Coming, coming, don't run so fast." Grace hurried after her daughter, camel coat lifting in the wind. In that moment, she was no title. She was herself. A free, whole, joyful woman. Sunlight streamed between the towers, falling on mother and daughter, stretching their shadows long and far, long enough to cover all 12 years since that Valentine's night at the Waldorf, when she discovered her husband's betrayal, to this bright early spring afternoon. From Mrs. Liu, to Grace Shun. From lost, to found. From fallen, to flying. That was her story. A story about losing everything, and gaining it all back. A woman who chose to be herself.